The water rose higher than Olivia Perkins had ever seen it, swallowing the valley floor like a hungry beast. She pressed one hand to her swollen belly as she struggled up the muddy hillside, rain pelting her face and thunder cracking overhead. 5 months pregnant and alone, she had nothing but the clothes on her back and her husband's pocket watch, the only reminder of Thomas, lost to pneumonia just weeks before. The rising waters had already claimed their small homestead cabin and now threatened to take the last of her hope as well. The torrential spring rains of 1878 had transformed the normally docile creek that ran through the small settlement of Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, into a raging monster. Olivia had awakened to water seeping through the floorboards, barely managing to escape before the cabin's foundation gave way entirely. She paused, gasping for breath, the weight of her unborn child making each step a challenge. The hilltop seemed impossibly far away, and the sky showed no sign of relenting. Her dress, soaked and mud-heavy, clung to her legs and threatened to drag her down with each labored step. "Madam," the voice came from above, barely audible above the storm. "Madam, up here." Olivia looked up, squinting through the rain to see a tall figure on horseback descending the slope toward her. The rider wore a wide-brimmed hat and a dark slicker that flapped in the wind like a great bird's wings. "Take my hand," he shouted, extending his arm as he maneuvered his horse alongside her. Too exhausted to question the offer, Olivia reached up. His grip was firm as he pulled her onto the saddle behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his rain-slicked coat. "Hold tight," he called over his shoulder. "We're headed for higher ground." The horse climbed steadily, its powerful muscles working beneath them as it navigated the treacherous slope. Olivia pressed her face against the stranger's back, eyes closed against the driving rain, and prayed for deliverance. By the time they crested the ridge, the valley below had become a vast, churning lake. Houses, barns, and fences were partially submerged, some already torn from their foundations and carried away by the current. "My God," she whispered, staring down at the destruction. "Worst flooding I've seen in 15 years, the man said, his voice deep and steady despite the chaos below. "Your home down there?" "Yes," Olivia said, her throat tight. "Or it was." He turned in the saddle to look at her, and for the first time she saw his face weathered and tanned with kind eyes beneath his dripping hat brim. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. "I'm Hank Hollister," he said. "Got a place about a mile from here. You're welcome to shelter there until this passes." "Olivia Perkins," she replied, suddenly aware of how improper their situation would appear in normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. "I'm grateful for your help, Mr. Hollister." His eyes dropped to her swollen belly, but he made no comment. Instead, he turned forward again and urged his horse onward. "Storm's not letting up anytime soon," he said. "Best get you somewhere dry." The ride to Hank's property took longer than expected, the horse picking its way carefully through the sodden landscape. When they finally arrived, Olivia saw a modest but well-built cabin sitting on a rocky prominence that rose well above the surrounding terrain. A barn and corral stood nearby, and several horses huddled beneath a lean-to, tails turned to the wind. Hank helped her down from the saddle with surprising gentleness, then led the horse to the barn. "Go on inside," he called to her. "Doors unlocked. I'll just see to Samson here and join you." The cabin's interior was sparse, but tidy, a far cry from what Olivia would have expected from a bachelor's quarters. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair pulled close. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood near the small kitchen area, and a curtained alcove presumably concealed a bed. Hunting rifles hung on pegs above the door, alongside coiled ropes and a saddle that needed repair. Olivia stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly unsure what to do. She was a stranger in this man's home, a pregnant widow with nowhere else to go. The gravity of her situation hit her all at once, and she pressed her hands to her face, struggling to contain the sob that rose in her throat. The door opened behind her and Hank entered, shaking water from his hat before hanging it on a hook. He removed his slicker and boots before turning to her. "You're soaked through," he observed. "Let me find you something dry." He disappeared behind the curtain and returned with a clean shirt and a pair of trousers. "These'll be big on you, but they're better than catching your death in those wet things. There's a blanket, too, for your—" He gestured vaguely toward her midsection, a flush creeping up his neck. For modesty's sake. Olivia accepted the clothes with murmured thanks. Hank busied himself building a fire, his back pointedly turned to give her privacy. She struggled out of her sodden dress and into his clothes, which indeed swallowed her slight frame. The shirt reached nearly to her knees, and she had to roll the trousers' waistband several times before tying them with a length of rope he'd provided. Despite their size, the dry clothes were a blessing. "I'm decent," she said softly when she'd finished. Hank turned, the fire now crackling cheerfully in the grate. "Sit by the fire," he suggested. "I'll make some coffee." As he moved about the small kitchen, Olivia studied him surreptitiously. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, a cowboy, judging by the gear around the cabin and the calluses on his hands. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and when he rolled up his sleeves to pump water into the coffee pot, she noted the strong forearms marked with old scars. "How far along are you?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. 5 months, Olivia replied, startled by the direct question. He nodded. "Your husband pneumonia," she said, the familiar pain squeezing her heart. 6 weeks ago." Hank's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear it." "Thank you for saving me today," Olivia said, changing the subject. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Just happened to be checking fence lines when the storm hit," he said, setting a steaming mug before her. "Saw you climbing that hill like your life depended on it." "It did," she said softly. They fell silent then, listening to the rain hammering on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Olivia cradled the warm mug in her hands, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day, coupled with her condition, had drained what little strength she possessed. "You should rest," Hank said, noticing her drooping eyelids. "Take the bed, I'll bunk out here by the fire." Too tired to argue, Olivia nodded gratefully and made her way to the curtained alcove. The bed was narrow but clean, with a patchwork quilt that smelled faintly of soap and pine. As she slipped beneath the covers, she heard Hank moving quietly around the main room, banking the fire for the night. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, listening to the storm and wondering what the coming days would bring. Her home was gone, her husband dead, and she carried a child who would never know its father. The future, which had once seemed so full of promise, now loomed dark and uncertain. Eventually, the rhythmic sound of rain lulled her into a fitful sleep, where she dreamed of rising waters and a faceless horseman carrying her to safety. Olivia woke to sunlight filtering through the cabin's small window. For a moment she was disoriented, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned, the flood, the desperate climb, the stranger on horseback. She rose slowly, smoothing her borrowed clothes as best she could. The main room was empty, but a fire crackled in the grate, and a pot of something that smelled like oatmeal bubbled nearby. A clean cup and bowl had been set on the table, along with a spoon and a small pot of honey. The door opened, and Hank entered, carrying a bucket of water. He looked surprised to see her up. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept well enough." "Better than I expected," Olivia replied truthfully. "Thank you for your hospitality." Hank set the bucket down and gestured to the pot. "Made breakfast, nothing fancy, but it'll fill your stomach." They ate in companionable silence, Olivia surprised at how hungry she was. The oatmeal was bland but filling, and the honey added welcome sweetness. "The rain stopped," Hank observed, looking toward the window. "I'm going to ride into Silver Creek, see how bad things are. You're welcome to stay here until I return." "I should come with you," Olivia said. "I need to see what's left of my home," Hank frowned. "Not sure that's wise in your condition." "I'm pregnant, Mr. Hollister, not infirm," she said with more spirit than she'd felt in weeks. "And I need to know what I'm facing." He studied her for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "Very well. But we'll take it slow and you'll tell me if you need to rest." An hour later, they were mounted on Hank's sturdy gelding, Olivia seated behind him again, this time wearing her own dress, which he'd hung near the fire to dry overnight. The landscape had been transformed by the flood, trees uprooted, new channels carved through fields, debris scattered across what had once been planted ground. The creek itself had receded somewhat but remained well above its normal banks. As they approached what remained of Silver Creek, Olivia gasped. The small settlement looked as though a giant hand had swept through it, leaving destruction in its wake. Several buildings had been completely washed away, while others stood damaged but intact. People moved about like ants, salvaging what they could from the mud and wreckage. "Sheriff still standing," Hank observed, pointing to a two-story building on higher ground, "and the mercantile looks mostly intact." Olivia barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the spot where her cabin had stood. Nothing remained but scattered timbers and a portion of the stone chimney listing drunkenly to one side. "I'm sorry," Hank said quietly, following her gaze. "Everything I had was in that cabin," she whispered. "All of Thomas's things. The cradle he built for the baby." Hank dismounted and helped her down, then stood awkwardly by as she picked her way through the mud toward the ruins. She knelt beside a splintered board, recognizing it as part of their table. Nearby lay a bent metal frame, all that remained of the small mirror Thomas had given her on their first anniversary. "Olivia, oh, thank the Lord." She looked up to see Martha Jenkins, the wife of Silver Creek's only doctor, hurrying toward her. The older woman embraced her tightly. "We feared the worst when we couldn't find you," Martha said, pulling back to examine her. "Are you hurt, the baby?" "We're fine," Olivia assured her. "Mr. Hollister found me and took me to his cabin to wait out the storm." Martha glanced at Hank, who stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand. "Well, that was fortunate," she said, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "You must come stay with us. Jacob and I have plenty of room, and you shouldn't be alone in your condition." Before Olivia could respond, Hank stepped forward. "Mrs. Perkins is welcome to stay at my place as long as she needs," he said. "It's on higher ground, away from the creek." Martha's eyebrows rose. "That's very generous, Mr. Hollister, but perhaps not entirely proper." "Martha," Olivia intervened, "Mr. Hollister saved my life. I'm certain he has only honorable intentions." She turned to Hank. "But I couldn't impose further. You've already done so much." Hank shifted uncomfortably under Martha's scrutiny. "It's no imposition," he insisted. "And I've been thinking. My place has 2 rooms. I've been using the second for storage, but it could be cleared out. You could have your privacy and—" He trailed off, looking at the destruction around them. "Well, there's not much left to salvage here." Martha's lips thinned with disapproval, but before she could object further, Dr. Jenkins approached, looking harried. "Olivia, thank heavens," he said. "We've been worried sick." "She's staying with us, Jacob," Martha said firmly. The doctor glanced between his wife and Hank. "Actually, my dear, that might be difficult. The Andersons are staying with us now. Their place was completely destroyed, and the Wilsons have taken in the Miller family. The whole town's doubling up," Hank added, "and my place is built solid on bedrock. It'll be dry and safe." Olivia looked from the Jenkins to Hank, torn between propriety and practicality. Silver Creek was a small community with limited resources, and the flood had stretched them to breaking point. Martha's offer was kind, but adding another person to an already crowded house seemed unreasonable. "I'll be fine with Mr. Hollister," she decided, "at least until other arrangements can be made." Martha opened her mouth to protest, but her husband placed a restraining hand on her arm. "If that's what you want, Olivia," he said. "But you come see me in a few days so I can check on you and the baby." After promising to do so, Olivia spent another hour searching through the remains of her cabin. She found little worth salvaging a cast iron skillet buried in mud, a wooden box containing Thomas's shaving kit, miraculously intact, and a sodden Bible that might be saved if dried carefully. As the sun climbed higher, Hank approached with Samson. "We should head back," he said gently. "You look tired and we've a ways to ride." Olivia nodded, suddenly aware of the ache in her lower back and the heaviness in her limbs. She accepted his help mounting the horse, then settled behind him, her small collection of salvaged items wrapped in a piece of canvas and tied to the saddle. As they rode away from Silver Creek, she felt the curious gazes of survivors following them. No doubt there would be talk the widow Perkins riding off with the solitary rancher, but at that moment, Olivia couldn't bring herself to care. She was alive, her baby was alive, and she had shelter for the night. Everything else would have to wait. Back at Hank's cabin, he made good on his promise to clear out the second room. It was small, little more than a storage closet, but he worked diligently, moving crates of supplies and tack to the barn to make space for a narrow cot. "It's not much," he apologized as he carried in the last armload of items, "but it'll give you some privacy." "It's more than I had yesterday," Olivia said softly. "Thank you." That evening, as they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Hank cleared his throat awkwardly. "I've been thinking," he began, "about your situation." Olivia set down her fork, bracing herself. Despite his kindness, she knew she couldn't impose on him indefinitely. "I understand this can't be a permanent arrangement," she said. "I'll speak with Reverend Miller tomorrow about—" "No, that's not what I meant," Hank interrupted. "I was thinking about building you a place of your own." Olivia stared at him. "Building me a—" "What? A house," Hank said, as if it were the most natural suggestion in the world. "Nothing fancy, mind you, just a simple cabin to start. I've got good timber on my property and a patch of ground up on the eastern rise that would be perfect. High enough to be safe from any flooding with a view of the mountains." "Mr. Hollister," Olivia said carefully, "that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly accept such an offer." "Why not?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. "You need a place to live." "I've got the skills and materials to build one. Seems straightforward enough to me." "Because it's too much," she insisted. "We barely know each other." Hank leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "My pa used to say a person's character shows clearest in a crisis," he said finally. "I've seen enough of yours to know you're a woman of courage and dignity. That's worth respecting." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I know what it's like to lose everything." Something in his tone made Olivia look at him more closely. "You've lost a home before." "And more," he said simply, offering no further explanation. "Look, I'm not asking for anything in return, just the satisfaction of knowing I've done right by someone who needs help." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "Will you let me do that, Mrs. Perkins?" Olivia felt something stir within her, not gratitude exactly, but a recognition of the rarity of such an offer. In the wake of Thomas's death and the flood's destruction, when it seemed the world had turned its back on her, here was a virtual stranger offering her not just temporary shelter but a future. "If you're certain," she said at last, "then yes, I accept, and please call me Olivia." A small smile curved Hank's lips. "Olivia," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Then you must call me Hank." Over the next several days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Hank rose before dawn to tend his small herd of cattle and the half-dozen horses he kept, while Olivia prepared breakfast and tidied the cabin. In the afternoons, Hank worked on plans for her new home, carefully measuring and sketching at the kitchen table while Olivia mended clothes or helped with whatever tasks her condition allowed. They rode into Silver Creek twice that week, once for Olivia's promised visit to Dr. Jenkins, who pronounced her and the baby in good health, and once to purchase supplies from the mercantile. The town was slowly recovering, with neighbors helping neighbors rebuild what had been lost. Several people approached Olivia to express their relief at her safety, though she noticed a few raised eyebrows at her continued residence with Hank. "People talk," she said quietly as they rode home, packages secured behind the saddle. "Let them," Hank replied, unconcerned. "We know the truth of it." The truth, Olivia reflected, was both simpler and more complicated than town gossip might suggest. She and Hank had developed a comfortable companionship based on mutual respect and shared labor. If she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, or if her own heart occasionally quickened when their hands brushed while washing dishes, neither acknowledged it. 10 days after the flood, Hank declared it time to begin construction on her cabin. He had chosen a site on a gentle rise about a quarter-mile from his own home, close enough for convenience, but far enough for propriety. The location offered a sweeping view of the valley, with mountains purple in the distance. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, standing beside him on the chosen spot. "But are you certain you can manage this alone? It seems an enormous undertaking." "Not alone," Hank corrected. "Got a couple of hands from the Rocking J coming to help with the heavy work. They owe me a favor." He pointed to where the foundation would go. "We'll start with a stone base, then raise the log walls. Should have the shell up within a week if the weather holds." True to his word, work began the following day. Hank's couple of hands turned out to be three burly cowboys named Joe, Frank, and Miguel, who arrived at sunrise with tools and good-natured ribbing for their friend. "Heard you were building a lady a house, Hollister," Joe said with a wink. "Never figured you for the romantic type." "It's not like that," Hank muttered, but the men just laughed and got to work hauling stone from a nearby outcropping. Olivia kept her distance from the construction site that first day, not wanting to be in the way. But by mid-afternoon, curiosity drew her up the hill with a jug of cool water for the workers. She found the men had already laid most of the stone foundation, with Hank directing operations like a general commanding troops. "Madam," the cowboys greeted her respectfully, removing their hats. If they had speculated about her relationship with Hank, they gave no sign of it now. "I brought water," she said, offering the jug. "Bless you," Frank said fervently, taking a deep drink before passing it to Miguel. "Gets mighty thirsty work up here." Hank approached, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the foundation. "It's coming along wonderfully," Olivia said, genuinely impressed by their progress. "Tomorrow we'll start on the walls," he said. "Got logs seasoning in the barn that'll be perfect." Over the next several days, Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to the construction site. At first, she came only to bring food and water, but soon she was staying to watch the cabin take shape. The men seemed to appreciate her interest, explaining their work and occasionally asking her preference on some detail or another. By the end of the week, the basic structure was complete: a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, 2 windows, and a front door facing the valley. It was small but solidly built, with room for a bed, table, and whatever few possessions Olivia might acquire. "Roof goes on next," Hank explained as they stood admiring the progress. The cowboys had departed for the day, leaving them alone in the golden light of late afternoon. "Then we'll chink the walls and lay the floor. Another week, maybe 2, and it'll be ready for you to move in." Olivia looked up at him, studying his profile against the setting sun. In the short time she'd known him, Hank Hollister had gone from stranger to savior to— what? Friend seemed too casual a word for what was developing between them, yet anything more remained unspoken. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked softly, the question that had lingered in her mind finally finding voice. Hank was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Just when Olivia thought he might not answer, he spoke. "7 years ago I had a wife," he said, his voice low. "Emily. She was carrying our first child when influenza swept through the settlement where we lived. She took sick suddenly and—" he swallowed hard. "I lost them both in a single night." Olivia's heart clenched. "Oh, Hank, I'm so sorry." "I couldn't help them," he continued as if he hadn't heard her. "Couldn't save them. After, I couldn't bear to stay there with all those memories, so I came west, bought this land, tried to forget." He finally looked at her, his eyes haunted by old grief. "When I saw you on that hillside with the flood rising and your baby to think of, I don't know, maybe I saw a chance to do something right this time." Without thinking, Olivia reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You have done something right," she said firmly. "More than right, you've given me hope when I had none." His fingers tightened around hers, and for a breathless moment, Olivia thought he might pull her closer. Instead, he gently released her hand and stepped back. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We should head back before it gets dark." The ride to his cabin passed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. That night, as Olivia lay in her narrow cot, she found herself thinking not of Thomas and the life they'd planned, but of Hank and the unexpected kindness he'd shown her. She placed a hand on her swelling belly, feeling the baby stir beneath her palm. "We'll be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. "We're not alone anymore." In the main room, separated by a thin wall, Hank lay awake as well, listening to the soft murmur of Olivia's voice and wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought her to his door. Work on the cabin continued over the following weeks, with Hank often laboring alone when his friends were called back to their regular duties. Olivia contributed where she could, sewing curtains for the windows from fabric purchased in town and helping to chink the spaces between logs with a mixture of clay and straw. "You shouldn't be climbing on that ladder," Hank protested when he found her reaching up to fill a gap near the roof. "I'm perfectly capable," Olivia retorted, though she did come down when he insisted. At nearly 6 months pregnant, her belly had grown noticeably, making some tasks more challenging. Still, she refused to be treated as helpless. "I may be carrying a child, but I'm not made of china." Hank's lips twitched. "No, madam, you certainly are not." The day the roof was completed, they celebrated with a special dinner venison stew that Hank had prepared, with biscuits Olivia had baked in his small oven. They ate at the kitchen table as rain pattered gently on the roof, a sound that once would have filled Olivia with dread but now seemed merely cozy. "To your new home," Hank said, raising his cup of coffee in a toast. "Our new home," Olivia corrected, then flushed at her slip. "I mean, you built it. It's as much yours as mine." Hank shook his head. "I built it for you, Olivia, for you and your child. And I'm grateful," she said, "more grateful than I can express, but I can't help wondering." She hesitated, uncertain how to articulate the question that had been forming in her mind. "Wondering what?" Hank prompted when she fell silent. Olivia took a deep breath. "What happens after the baby comes? I'll have a roof over my head thanks to you, but how will I provide for us? Thomas left very little, and what we had was lost in the flood." Hank set down his cup, looking troubled. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted, "but you needn't worry, I wouldn't leave you without means." "That's just it," Olivia said, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't want charity, Hank. I need to stand on my own feet." "What about the land your cabin sits on?" he asked. "It's good soil. You could grow vegetables, maybe keep chickens. I could help you get started." "And in winter," she pressed. "When nothing grows and the baby needs milk and clothing," Hank frowned, clearly wrestling with the problem. Finally, he said, "There's another possibility, one I've been considering for a while now." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "We could marry." Olivia felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. "Marry? It would be a practical arrangement," Hank said quickly, his words tumbling out as if he'd rehearsed them. "You'd have security for yourself and your child. I'd have someone to keep house and—" "Well, it gets lonely out here sometimes. A marriage of convenience," Olivia said softly. "Yes," Hank agreed, then paused. Unless, he met her eyes, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. Unless it could be more than that in time. The quiet that followed seemed to stretch between them, filled with unspoken hopes and fears. Olivia thought of Thomas, the husband she'd loved and lost. She thought of her unborn child who deserved a father. And she thought of Hank, this kind, steadfast man who had already given her so much and asked for nothing in return. "I'm still in mourning," she said at last. "It wouldn't be right to, I understand," Hank interrupted, pushing back from the table. "It was presumptuous of me to suggest it." "Please forget I spoke." "No," Olivia said quickly, reaching across to catch his wrist. "That's not what I meant. I only meant that I need time. Thomas has been gone barely 3 months. I loved him and I honor his memory." Hank sat back down slowly. "Of course you do." "But I can't deny that I've come to care for you," Olivia continued, her voice soft but steady. "More than I expected to, more than perhaps I should so soon after losing him." Hope flickered in Hank's eyes. "Then you're not saying no, I'm saying, perhaps when the time is right." She released his wrist, her fingers trailing across his calloused palm. "For now, let's finish the cabin. The rest will come as it may." Hank nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "As it may," he agreed. Over the next week, they completed the cabin's interior, laying plank floors, installing shelves, and building a simple bed frame that Hank swore would hold until he could craft something finer. Through it all, they worked with a new awareness of each other, their hands occasionally lingering when they passed tools, their eyes meeting across the room with unspoken questions. The night before Olivia was to move into her new home, they sat on the porch of Hank's cabin, watching fireflies rise from the grassy slope. July had brought warmer weather, and the evenings were pleasant enough to spend outdoors. "Will you be all right there alone?" Hank asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "I'll be fine," Olivia assured him. "It's not far after all, and you've made it so comfortable." "Still," he persisted, "if you need anything at all, you just call out. I'll hear you." Olivia smiled at his concern. "I know you will." They fell silent again, the night sounds enveloping them, crickets chirping, a distant coyote's howl, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "I've been thinking about what you said," Olivia said eventually. "About marriage." Hank went very still beside her, and I think, yes." She turned to face him, finding his eyes in the gathering darkness. Not right away, but perhaps after the baby comes when I've had time to settle. For a moment, Hank didn't react. Then slowly he reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "I'll wait," he promised. "As long as you need." The following morning, they moved Olivia's few belongings to the new cabin. It wasn't much her salvaged items from the flood, some clothing Martha Jenkins had given her, and household goods Hank had purchased in town. But as she stood in the center of the main room, sunlight streaming through the windows she'd curtained herself, Olivia felt a surge of pride. This was her home, built by hands that cared for her. "What do you think?" Hank asked, setting down the last crate of supplies. "It's perfect," she said honestly. He smiled, pleased with her approval, then glanced around as if to ensure everything was in order. "I should let you get settled," he said finally, "but I'll check on you later, bring some supper over." "Thank you," Olivia said. She stepped forward impulsively and kissed his cheek. "For everything." Hank's eyes widened at the gesture and a flush crept up from his collar. "You're welcome," he said gruffly, then turned and strode from the cabin before she could see how deeply her simple action had affected him. Alone in her new home, Olivia set about arranging her meager possessions. She placed Thomas's shaving kit in the small chest beside the bed, a reminder of the love they had shared. But she also positioned the rocking chair Hank had surprised her with by the window, facing the distant mountains, a symbol, perhaps, of the future that lay ahead. Days turned to weeks, and July melded into August. True to his word, Hank helped Olivia establish a small garden beside her cabin, turning the soil and showing her how to plant late-season vegetables that might yield before the first frost. He brought her 6 young hens and built a small coop for them, ensuring she'd have eggs for protein and a bit of income if she chose to sell the surplus. Each day, he found some reason to visit, bringing fresh milk from his cow, helping with a stubborn door hinge, or simply stopping by to check that she was well. And each day, Olivia found herself looking forward to his arrival, watching for his tall figure coming up the path between their cabins. As her pregnancy advanced, moving into the 7th month, Dr. Jenkins made the journey from town twice to examine her. "You're doing remarkably well," he pronounced after the second visit. "Both you and the baby seem healthy as can be." "Thanks in large part to Hank," Olivia said, glancing to where he waited respectfully outside during the examination. "I don't know what would have become of us without him." The doctor followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "He's a good man," he said. "Reserved, keeps to himself mostly, but respected in these parts." He paused, then added with studied casualness, "There's been talk in town about your arrangement here." Olivia's chin lifted. "Has there indeed? Nothing malicious," Dr. Jenkins assured her hastily. "Just concern for your reputation, being a young widow and all." "My reputation is the least of my worries, Doctor," Olivia said firmly. "But for what it's worth, Hank Hollister has been a perfect gentleman and we have an understanding between us." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "An understanding." "We intend to marry," Olivia said, the words feeling both strange and right on her lips. "After the baby is born." Dr. Jenkins nodded, satisfied. "Well then, that should quiet the gossips, and if I may say so, I think you've chosen wisely. Now let's discuss what to expect in these final months." After the doctor left, Olivia found Hank splitting wood behind her cabin, his rhythmic movements sending chips flying with each swing of the axe. "What did the doctor say?" he asked, pausing in his work. "Everything all right. Everything's fine," she assured him. "The baby's growing well and I'm healthy." Relief crossed his features. "Good, that's good." "I told him about us," Olivia said, watching his reaction carefully. "About our plans to marry." Hank set the axe down, giving her his full attention. "You're still certain then?" "More certain every day," she said softly. He stepped closer, hesitant yet determined. "May I?" He gestured vaguely toward her stomach, understanding his request. Olivia nodded and took his hand, placing it against the swell of her belly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if on cue, the baby kicked vigorously against his palm. Hank's eyes widened in wonder. "Strong little thing, isn't it?" "Very," Olivia laughed. "Especially at night when I'm trying to sleep." He didn't remove his hand, marveling at the life stirring beneath his touch. "Boy or girl, do you think?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Thomas was convinced it would be a boy, but I've had dreams of a daughter." "Either way," Hank said, finally stepping back, "it'll be loved." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet certainty, brought tears to Olivia's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to embarrass him with excessive emotion. "Yes," she agreed. "It will." September brought cooler temperatures and the first harvest from Olivia's garden: carrots, late beans, and squash that would keep well into winter. Hank showed her how to preserve some of the bounty, teaching her the canning techniques his mother had used. "You're quite the homesteader," Olivia observed as they worked side by side in her small kitchen, the air fragrant with vinegar and spices. "I wouldn't have expected a bachelor cowboy to know so much about keeping house. Had to learn to fend for myself after Emily died," Hank said, his mention of his late wife coming more easily now. "Can't live on beans and coffee forever." "Well, I'm grateful for the lessons," Olivia said, sealing another jar of pickled beans. "Though I hope to repay you with better meals once we're married." The word still felt new on her tongue, a promise of a future she hadn't imagined possible after losing Thomas. Yet here she was, preparing for a life with a man who had come to mean more to her than she could have believed. "Speaking of that," Hank said, setting down his knife, "I've been thinking, with winter coming on, it might make sense for us to marry sooner rather than later." Olivia looked up, surprised. "Sooner, before the baby comes," Hank clarified. "Weather can turn bad quickly here, and if you needed help in the middle of the night." He cleared his throat. "It would be more proper if we were already wed." "I see," Olivia said slowly, considering his reasoning. It made practical sense, yet she hesitated. "What would people think? I'm still so obviously—" She gestured to her rounded belly. "People already know the child isn't mine," Hank pointed out. "That won't change whether we marry now or later. But this way the baby will have my name from the start, if you want that." The thought had appeal. Her child would begin life as a Hollister rather than a Perkins, with all the protection and security that Hank's name could provide. "When?" she asked finally. "Next week." "I could ride into town tomorrow, speak with the Reverend." Olivia nodded, her decision made. "Next week, then." True to his word, Hank rode to Silver Creek the following day and returned with news that Reverend Miller would perform the ceremony the next Sunday after services. The town had largely recovered from the flood, though signs of the disaster remained in rebuilt structures and altered landscapes. "Martha Jenkins insists on hosting a small gathering afterward," Hank reported with a mix of resignation and amusement. "Seems she's decided our marriage redeems the scandal of our living arrangements." Olivia laughed. "Dear Martha, she means well, though her sense of propriety is stricter than most." The week passed in a flurry of preparation. Olivia used fabric from town to sew herself a new dress, not white, which would have felt wrong both for a widow and for her advanced pregnancy, but a soft blue that complemented her eyes. Hank, meanwhile, repaired his best shirt and even rode to the larger settlement of Apache Junction to purchase a proper suit jacket. "I want to do this right," he said when Olivia expressed surprise at his finery. "You deserve that much." On the morning of their wedding day, Olivia woke to find a small bouquet of late wildflowers on her doorstep, tied with a ribbon and accompanied by a note in Hank's distinctive handwriting. "Until this afternoon." The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes, happy ones this time. She placed the flowers in water and prepared for the day ahead, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The ride to Silver Creek was taken slowly, with Hank solicitously helping Olivia into the wagon he'd borrowed for the occasion. They spoke little on the journey, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with shared anticipation. The church was fuller than usual when they arrived, news of their impending marriage having spread through the small community. Olivia felt eyes upon her as Hank escorted her to a pew, some curious, others approving, a few perhaps judgmental. But when she glanced up at Hank's steady profile, she found she didn't much care what others thought. After the regular service, Reverend Miller invited them to the front of the church. Standing before their neighbors, with her baby stirring within her and Hank's warm hand clasping hers, Olivia spoke her vows in a clear voice that carried to the rafters. "I, Olivia Perkins, take you, Henry Hollister, to be my lawfully wedded husband." The words were traditional, but the emotion behind them was anything but conventional. In the span of a few short months, this man had become her rescuer, her friend, and now her husband. When Hank slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, another surprise he must have purchased in Apache Junction, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended any lingering doubts. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Miller concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Hank hesitated, his eyes seeking permission. Olivia nodded slightly, and he bent to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief but tender, a promise of more to come when they were alone. The gathering at the Jenkins home afterward was lively but not overwhelming, with neighbors offering congratulations and small gifts for the newlyweds. Martha had outdone herself with refreshments, and even Dr. Jenkins broke out a bottle of good whiskey for a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "And to family." "Family," Hank repeated, his eyes meeting Olivia's across the room. In that moment, something passed between them, an acknowledgement that what had begun as an arrangement of necessity had become something far more meaningful. It was late afternoon when they finally took their leave, thanking their hosts and accepting final good wishes. The ride home was quiet again, but charged with a new awareness of each other. When they reached the fork in the path between their two cabins, Hank drew the wagon to a halt. "Which one?" he asked simply. Olivia considered the question. Her new cabin represented independence, a space that was wholly hers, but Hank's home, where he had first sheltered her from the storm, was larger and better established. "Yours," she decided, "for tonight at least. We can decide about the rest tomorrow." Hank nodded and guided the wagon to his cabin. When they arrived, he helped her down, then swept her into his arms before she could take a step toward the door. "Hank," she gasped, surprised by the sudden movement, "put me down. I'm far too heavy in my condition." "Nonsense," he said, carrying her effortlessly across the threshold. "It's tradition." Inside, he set her gently on her feet, his hands lingering at her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hollister." The name, so new and yet already dear, brought a smile to Olivia's lips. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister." They stood for a moment, suddenly shy with each other despite all they had shared. Then Hank stepped back, gesturing to the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I could fix something." "Later, perhaps," Olivia said. She took his hand, leading him to sit beside her on the small sofa before the fireplace. "For now, I just want to be here with you." The weeks following their wedding were a time of adjustment and discovery. They decided to make Hank's cabin their primary home, using Olivia's as a guest house and storage space for now. Olivia brought her few possessions over, including Thomas's shaving kit, which Hank respectfully placed on a shelf without comment. Their nights were spent in the same bed, though physical intimacy developed slowly. Hank was careful not to press, mindful of Olivia's advanced pregnancy and the newness of their relationship. But they found other ways to express affection, holding each other through the night, sharing gentle kisses, talking late into the evening about their hopes and dreams. "I want more children," Hank admitted one night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively over her belly. "After this one comes, when you're ready, if you want that too." "I'd like that," Olivia said softly. A big family. They were building a life together, step by careful step, when the first snowfall of the season arrived in late October. Olivia, now in her 8th month, had become increasingly homebound as her movements grew more cumbersome. Hank did his best to keep her comfortable, bringing books from town and fashioning a better chair for her aching back. "Winter's coming early this year," he observed, watching fat flakes drift past the window. "Good thing we got the harvest in." Olivia nodded, one hand absently stroking her belly. "Hank," she said suddenly, "I've been thinking about names for the baby." He turned to her, his expression open. "Oh. If it's a boy, I'd like to call him Thomas, after his father," she said, watching Hank carefully for his reaction. "But with Henry as his middle name." A complex emotion crossed Hank's face, understanding mingled with something deeper. "Thomas Henry Hollister," he said, testing the sound of it. "A good, strong name. And if it's a girl," Olivia continued, "I thought, perhaps Emily." Hank's breath caught. "Emily, after your wife," Olivia confirmed. "If you think that would be all right, Emily Olivia Hollister." For a moment, Hank couldn't speak. Then he crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking both her hands in his. "You would do that?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "They were part of our lives," Olivia said gently. "Thomas, Emily, they helped make us who we are. I don't want to forget them, and I don't want our child to think they didn't matter." Hank pressed his forehead against their joined hands, overcome. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you for longer than I had any right to." It was the first time either had spoken those words, though the feeling had been growing between them for months. Olivia's heart swelled with answering emotion. "And I love you," she whispered. Not instead of Thomas, but alongside that love, differently but just as truly. He rose then and kissed her, a kiss that spoke of gratitude and reverence and a passion held carefully in check. Olivia returned it with equal fervor, sealing the declaration that had been building since the day he'd found her on that flood-swept hillside. November arrived with bitter winds and more snow, confining them largely to the cabin. Hank ventured out daily to tend the livestock and check their supplies, but Olivia remained indoors, her body growing heavier and more unwieldy as her time approached. Dr. Jenkins visited once more, pronouncing everything in order. "The baby's head is down," he told them. "Could be any day now, or it might be another 2 weeks. First babies often take their time." After he left, Hank became increasingly attentive, rarely straying far from the cabin. He prepared a cradle for the baby, lining it with soft blankets and positioning it near the fire for warmth. "You're going to be a wonderful father," Olivia observed, watching him sand the edges of the wooden cradle to a silky smoothness. "I hope so," he said, his expression serious. "Never thought I'd have the chance." 3 days later, in the pre-dawn hours of a snowy morning, Olivia woke with a sharp pain gripping her abdomen. She lay still, waiting to see if it would return. When it did, several minutes later, she gently shook Hank awake. "I think it's time," she said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the flutter of fear in her chest. Hank was instantly alert, sitting up and lighting the lamp beside their bed. "Are you sure?" Another contraction answered for her, causing Olivia to grimace and nod. "I'll get the doctor," Hank said, already reaching for his clothes. "No," Olivia caught his arm. "The snow's too deep and it's still dark. Wait until morning." "But first babies take time," she reminded him. "Dr. Jenkins said so himself. For now, just stay with me." Reluctantly, Hank agreed, though he insisted on stoking the fire and preparing hot water and clean linens. As the night gave way to a gray, snow-filled dawn, Olivia's pains increased in frequency and intensity. By mid-morning, they were coming regularly, and Hank could no longer be dissuaded. "I'm going for the doctor," he said firmly. "You need him here." "Be careful," Olivia pleaded, gripping his hand through another contraction. "The roads will be treacherous." "I'll take Samson," Hank assured her. "He's sure-footed in the snow." "Martha Jenkins' live's closest. I'll stop there first and ask her to come stay with you while I fetch the doctor." The plan was sound, but nature had other ideas. No sooner had Hank left than Olivia's labor intensified dramatically. Martha arrived an hour later to find her on the bed, panting through contractions that now came barely a minute apart. "Lord have mercy," the older woman exclaimed, quickly removing her snow-dusted coat and rolling up her sleeves. "This baby isn't waiting for any doctor. Where's Hank?" Olivia gasped between pains. "On his way to town," Martha said, checking her progress with practiced hands. "But you're nearly there, child. This little one is coming now." What followed was a blur of pain and effort unlike anything Olivia had ever experienced. Martha's calm instructions guided her through each push, her experienced hands supporting where needed. And then, as the short winter day was already fading toward dusk, a lusty cry filled the cabin. "A girl," Martha announced triumphantly, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean cloth. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Exhausted but elated, Olivia reached for her daughter. The tiny face, red and wrinkled from the ordeal of birth, was the most beautiful sight she had ever beheld. "Emily," she whispered, tracing a finger along the baby's cheek. "Emily Olivia Hollister." Martha cleaned and settled them both, building up the fire and preparing a light broth for Olivia to sip. As darkness fell completely, they heard the sound of horses approaching at speed. The door burst open, admitting a gust of cold air and a snow-covered Hank with Dr. Jenkins close behind him. Hank's frantic expression gave way to stunned wonder as he took in the scene before him, Olivia propped up in bed, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "You have a daughter," Olivia said softly. Hank approached the bed slowly, as if afraid his presence might somehow disrupt the miracle before him. Dr. Jenkins, after a quick assessment that mother and child were indeed well, stepped back to give the new family a moment together. "Emily," Olivia said, turning the baby slightly so Hank could see her face. "Meet your papa." With trembling hands, Hank reached for his daughter. Olivia carefully transferred the swaddled infant to his arms, watching as his expression transformed from awe to profound love. "Hello, little Emily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you." The baby squirmed in his hold, her tiny fist escaping the blanket to wave in the air. Hank caught it gently between his fingers, marveling at the perfect miniature nails, the impossibly small knuckles. "She's perfect," he said, looking up at Olivia with eyes that brimmed with tears. "You're both perfect." In that moment, with snow falling softly outside and firelight dancing on the walls of the home he had made, Hank Hollister knew he had found what he had never dared to hope for again: a family, a future, a second chance at happiness. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Emily grew from a curious infant into a spirited toddler, her dark hair and bright eyes reminiscent of the father she would never know, but her determined nature all Hank. She took her first steps in the garden Olivia had expanded and spoke her first words, "Papa" and "horse," in that order, to Hank's immeasurable pride. Olivia's cabin on the rise became a workshop for Hank, who discovered a talent for crafting furniture that supplemented their income from the cattle and crops. Neighbors from Silver Creek, and even as far as Apache Junction, commissioned pieces from him, admiring the clean lines and sturdy construction of his tables, chairs, and cabinets. Thomas Henry Hollister joined the family 14 months after Emily's birth, a sturdy boy with Hank's square jaw and Olivia's gentle eyes. 2 years later came Margaret Rose, named for both their mothers, a sweet-natured child who could often be found trailing after her older siblings or sitting contentedly in Olivia's lap as she sewed. On the 5th anniversary of the flood that had brought them together, Hank and Olivia stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. The original cabin had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a proper bedroom for the children and a larger kitchen where Olivia now taught Emily the basics of cooking. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Olivia asked, leaning against Hank's solid warmth. "If the flood hadn't happened, if you hadn't found me that day," Hank's arm tightened around her waist. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at what we have, and I can only be grateful for whatever twist of fate brought you to me." "Even with all the challenges," Olivia teased. Those 5 years had not been without difficulties: harsh winters, occasional illness, the constant work of maintaining a homestead in the Arizona territory. "Especially with the challenges," Hank said seriously. "They've shown me just how strong you are, how strong we are together." Olivia turned in his embrace to face him, noting the silver now threading through his dark hair at the temples, the laugh lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when they met. She loved those changes, loved knowing she had contributed to them with shared joys and sorrows over the years. "I never expected to find love again after Thomas died," she said, voicing a thought she had held close for a long time. "I thought that part of my life was over. And I never thought I'd recover from losing Emily," Hank acknowledged. "Never imagined I could open my heart again. Yet here we are," Olivia said, smiling up at him. "Here we are," Hank agreed, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day, but now deepened by years of shared life and love. From the yard came the sound of children's laughter as Emily taught little Margaret how to twirl like a dancer. Thomas, serious beyond his years, was examining a beetle he'd found with the same concentration Hank showed when crafting his furniture. As Olivia watched them, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, she reflected on the long journey from that desperate day on the flooded hillside. She had lost much: her first husband, her home, the life she had planned, but she had gained more than she could have imagined. A love that had come unexpectedly, children who filled her days with joy, and a sense of belonging that ran deeper than any roots she had known before. The flood that had nearly claimed her life had instead swept her toward a future brighter than any she could have envisioned. And the cowboy who had built her a house on higher ground had, in the end, built her so much more: a home, a family, a life rich with love and purpose. "Mama, Papa, come see what I found," Thomas called, interrupting her reflections. Hand in hand, Hank and Olivia walked toward their children, toward the future they continued to build together, one day at a time, on the solid foundation of a love that had begun in crisis but flourished in peace. And as the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly where they were meant to be, not just on higher ground, but in each other's hearts.